So at this point, I will hand over to Budi. I hope, Budi, you've had a chance to have a look at any questions that you might have received there, and I invite you to respond to any of those that are there. So over to you, Budi.
Thank you, Brian. The first question is regarding what we call as intimidation or reprisal regarding what we are doing. I think Brian has mentioned about that issue, and indeed, for me personally, is I do receive some what I presume as act of reprisal against me through my family. Therefore, for the moment, I cannot go back to Indonesia because of the my situation. But it doesn't mean that we should not continue to work on that issue, because I think it's quite important, really, for us to bring the mandate of the people in raising the concerns. Regarding what the government has done, the second question, what the government has done with the letter. First, of course, not of course, but for the context of the Indonesian government, there's a denial. No, I think the first reaction by the Indonesian government was by saying that there is no such a thing as indigenous peoples in Indonesia. They don't recognize the notion of indigenous peoples as it is explained in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The Indonesian government indeed has a certain definition of the indigeneity of the people by saying that everyone is indigenous people. So, however, there is a draft law on the legal indigenous community, in which the recognition should be done through a legal recognition by the government, which is against the spirit of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So we are working on that as well through different mechanisms, just to really put pressure to the Indonesian government at the international level, as well as the associations of the indigenous people in Indonesia, so that at one day there should be a change in the Indonesian legal system, in which the indigenous people status can be recognized according to the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So there are some challenges, there are some hurdles, but I think we trying as much as possible to continue working despite those difficulties. Thank you.
Thanks, Budi. Okay, I think I'll now hand over to Steve. I'm not sure if you've got some questions there, Steve, but I invite you to respond to any that are there.
Thank you. So Felicia has asked whether it's costly. Actually, COVID has done us good because we could do all these consultations online, and we do have a staff that works with children's parliaments, and they could use this as a tool to engage young people. So where expenses were concerned, it wasn't really an added expense, given that we didn't do on-ground consultations this time. But if we were to move into on-ground, it could be quite a challenge, given that India is such a huge country. Sorry for that. The other question was on long-term and short-term. We consider it to be a long-term engagement because we don't see it as just a report. I mentioned it's kind of a mandate for us for the next 5 years. We've got to take this now to embassies. We'll be taking it to our ministries. We'll be taking it to the UN bodies. We'll also be taking it to grassroots bodies as well. So we're looking at this as certainly as long-term, and we've got to be more engaged with the midterm review and the tracking of it throughout the years. I think those are the two questions, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We have a number of minutes left, so what we'd like to do is to offer the opportunity to any of you, our participants, to share your experience of using any of the UN mechanisms that we've talked about today. Or perhaps maybe you just want to share any learnings or takeaways that you found particularly helpful from today. So we'll initially limit you to a couple of minutes. So if you'd like to speak, just click the raise your hand button, which is in the reactions section at the bottom of the screen, and then we'll invite you to speak. So Felicia, I see your hand raised. Would you care to speak? You have the floor. You'll need to unmute. We still can't hear you. You need to unmute. There, no, you're right. Okay. Over to you,
Okay.
Felicia.
Thank you. Thank you. It wasn't allowing me to unmute for a while there. My question is not really about any of the things that you have mentioned, but maybe it's something which is dear to my heart, and I would like to see if there's something that can be done through this forum. And what it is it's about the Ukraine and how all of the big countries are avoiding trying to do anything about the closing the skies to Russia. And yet I feel, I'm not a high technology person, but I would have thought that there would be a way of closing down part of the Russian satellites, which would stop them being able to make airstrikes. And I just wonder if there's anybody in the UN that can take that up and see, is that possible? Or is that outside the whole range of the UN mechanisms that you're working with? Thank you.
So any of our panelists want to respond to that? Or, I mean, I suppose my comment is it's probably at a different level to NGOs. I mean, there's certainly a very great concern at the international level among countries who are trying to address the terrible situation there. But we are actually co-signed a statement about the situation in Ukraine that was delivered in this Human Rights Council session, but that's probably about the extent to which we can become involved. It's really, it seems to me, at a much higher level than NGOs can really do much about, but maybe Budi might have something to add to that.
Yeah, I would like to agree with you, Brian, that the issue with the UN is not, the limitation of the UN is not the supra-nation. You know, UN is based on the members. And as you know, the only UN body that has the capacity to impose decision is the Security Council. And as you know very well, that within the Security Council, you have the 5 permanent members that have the veto right. Therefore, the efforts of the UN Security Council to adopt resolutions on the situation in Ukraine has been blocked, not only by Russia, but also by China. So that is the limitations of the UN that we have at the moment, so that there is no strong resolutions within the Security Council. Having said that, the UN General Assembly has adopted a resolution, very strong resolution regarding the situation in Ukraine, as well as the Human Rights Council. But those 2 resolutions are non-legally binding. It means that they cannot impose those 2 resolutions so that the situation that Russia leave Ukraine. It's very unfortunate. And having said that as well, if you have the opportunity to see as well how many states that voted for the resolution and against the resolution or in abstention, some of the countries, they even do not want to join most of the nations to condemn Russia. So that's also very sad, either in the General Assembly or in the Human Rights Council. So it means that there's no anonymity, there's no how to say, unified force within the UN member states in condemning the situation. So we have to take into consideration those reality. However, I think the message is very strong, either from most of the member states or the civil society, to condemn what's happening in Ukraine. So that's my view.
Thanks, Budi. Anyone else like to make a comment, ask a question, share an experience? I see a question from Greta. What are going to be psychological repercussions of COVID, 2 years closing of schools? Any data or comment? Anyone like to respond to that?
I know that in India, the UNICEF have done a number of studies on this. So, Geeta, I'll get back to you on sending you some more data on that. I don't have it on the tips of my finger at the moment, but I know they have had a number of studies done on this particular aspect.
We have a question from Pauline. How will the UN protect a member who is speaking out the truth and feels insecure?
Can I say something on that?
Yes, Budi.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the UN put some efforts in trying to protect the human rights defenders in danger, or those who are victims of reprisals. So there is a specific mechanism within the UN in which the government, the UN will write a report on the list of people experiencing intimidation. That report is issued by the UN General Assembly. So when the names of those people are made public, so that can provide a little bit more layer of protections of the person. However, UN is not, as you know, UN is not the police of the world. So the UN cannot take concrete actions in trying to provide physical support. In some cases in which if the life of a person is really in imminent danger, the UN can provide facilities in trying to bring that person outside the zone of danger. So there are some instances like that in which the person, the human rights defenders that is really in imminent danger, can be taken through facilitated by the UN to a safe space. But at the same time, as you know, that the UN also has what we call as the the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, in which is a kind of legal protection or the guidelines on the need of the legal protections for the human rights defenders that will force the states to respect the human rights defenders and not to attack human rights defenders while they are doing the work. I don't know if it is very clear, but what I'm trying to say is that there are some mechanisms, but still this mechanism sometimes is not very real in the real life of people receiving the threat. But there are some mechanisms in trying to protect them by sending message to the government. We know that this person is in danger. We keep an eye, and we will not be very, very happy if you harm them.
Thanks, Budi. We've got any other comments or questions? Anyone else like to speak? Raise your hand in the reactions button if you have. It makes it simpler to identify you. I might just add one other comment. That's probably a little bit of a side issue, but one of I think the really unfortunate consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is it's distracted the world from I think what's even a more serious threat that our planet is facing, and that's the whole issue of what's happening to our climate. And just last month, the International Panel on Climate Change released another interim report, which is really disturbing, really frightening. And yet the world is distracted by what's happening in the Ukraine, and that runs the risk of delaying action. So I just put that comment out there too. I see Anthony Daka has raised his hand. So Anthony, if you could unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Okay, thanks, Brian. The question goes to Steve. I just wanted to know, how does he communicate to the nation? Because he said that some of the questions that the kids ask in Parliament are somehow edited or altered.
No, two forums in Parliament. One is edited when the Vice President of India presides. The other is informal because you have opposition parties there, and therefore the children are freer to ask even the tricky questions because some political party will back what they're saying. Yeah, so one is a very formal session, the other is informal, but we also have more informal gatherings and interactions with members of parliament and members of legislative assemblies and local administrative bodies at different forums. So you've also got to be able to pitch which issue you're going to bring up with which MP based on their political lineage. Anthony.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thanks, Steve.
Maybe I could respond to Mary's question there. The strategy we use in India is to bring a coalition together to write reports. So when the WGHR came together, there's hundreds of NGOs writing that report, and you don't know particularly which NGO is behind a particular comment. So that's been one strategy we've used. And the other strategy that Brian mentioned is to use NGOs abroad to take up the more contentious issues that we can't raise here in India.
Maybe to respond to the questions of the sister, yeah, Philippines is going to be examined by the UPR very soon. The deadline is going to be the end of this month, together with some other countries like India and Indonesia as well. So indeed, and we know very well that the situation of human rights defenders in the Philippines is really a danger. We will deliver a statement as Transparency International tomorrow on that issue. What I think would suggest is that if you think that there is a possibility of reprisals or impact on you, you can also make a submissions without mentioning the name of your congregation or your organization. So this is exactly what Brian has mentioned, that some of us, some religious congregation or some NGOs having presence in Myanmar, we ask Human Rights International that has kindly extended their good heart to read the statement, because precisely we are afraid of having repercussion. We had two FMM sisters coming 2 weeks ago to Geneva, and we did some lobby here and there, but they were really under the confidential arrangement, because the most important thing is that not that our name will appear, but also the issue is addressed. So I think for the UPR submissions, try to think about what can be the possibility. Otherwise, you can also be the silent, let's say the silent supporters of that UPR. And some of the lay NGO, they will be brave enough to put their names up front. But if you think that your community can be intimidated afterward, maybe it's good also to put a little bit of low profile on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Budi. Any more questions, comments? I see Kevin has made Kevin Cawley has made a comment there. Do you want to speak to that, Kevin?
Hi, good morning from New York. Yes, I entered 2 items in the chat. First of all, I want to thank the ERI Energies for pushing out this kind of a program. And I'm thanking Budi in particular and Steve, who I know, for your efforts. I'm also sorry to hear, Budi, about your family and difficulty and your own problems of your government, the government of Indonesia pushing back. It's all well and good for me to stay here in New York in the safety of this part of the world and speak about these things, but I think it requires a great more courage from people like yourself and Stephen to speak up. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. The resolution on go back to the question originally about the Ukraine. The General Assembly did pass a resolution, as you noted, that's not legally binding, but it was interesting to see that 90 countries co-sponsored that resolution. 141 voted in favor of the resolution to condemn the Russian invasion. 5 voted against. You can guess who they are. But interesting enough, 35 countries abstained. They were too afraid to even say yes or no on that question. So it's an indication, I think, to all of us that this is a fraught world, and there's tremendous pressures on all these governments to not put their foot wrong in terms of global politics. So that's one more reminder, I think, of the value of the UN, and it does expose the fault lines and lets us know how to proceed very carefully here so that we don't do more damage. There are some good things happening. I have noted them in the chat. There is a process going forward now about the law of the sea. That kind of work is always ongoing, but it's I think reassuring to know that there are people, even as we are working here this morning, who are working on how to save the oceans, trying to come up with legally binding instruments at some point. And then at the same time, this horrendous scourge of plastic that's destroying the place, particularly the oceans. There is a draft treaty coming forward on the use of plastics, and that will be a global agreement. That's again in the beginning stages, but we are working on it. And I echo Brian's comments that yes, the invasion of Ukraine has distracted everybody from the super, as we say, the worst possible problem, which is the climate continues to warm, sea levels continue to rise. And we're very distracted now because the Ukraine crisis has pushed the climate crisis off the front pages. So we do well to pay attention to that question, not to take our eyes off that concern. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.